I'm here in the chapel at the University of Winchester to talk a little bit about the research that I've been doing on Christian-Muslim relations in Syria. For nearly 40 years I've been visiting the Middle East, and for many years I've been deeply moved and impressed by the religious plurality of the region. It's been a crossroads of faiths, of cultures, of societies for centuries. And seeing churches and mosques side by side in many of the countries, particularly in the Levant, in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, is quite a striking experience. This is something that is under-recognized in the wider world. Since the war started in Syria, and I was able to go back to Syria, I saw how this plurality of Christianity and of Islam, these multiple expressions of Christianity and Islam side by side, were actually sustaining people as well within the midst of conflict, and were offering a degree of hope. So the research is structured in actually a very clear way. First of all, I lay out the Christian landscape. So Christianity in Syria is hugely diverse. All the families, 5 families of the church, are represented in Syria. Christianity was born in Syria. It's more diverse than almost anywhere else in the world. So I lay out that history and the context and the Christian families in Syria, that diversity. Next, I lay out the Muslim context, a bit of the history of Islam in Syria, and also establish the different Muslim groups in Syria, Sunni with all its varieties, Shia, Druze, and so forth. And again, Islam in Syria is diverse. It's not monolithic. So having laid out the Christian and the Muslim landscape, if you like, I then begin to look at issues which affect those, the interreligious dynamic. I look at things like religious leadership and the role religious leaders play within communities and within society, and that's very important within the Middle Eastern context. And that's a key point within the thesis, actually, the importance of the religious dynamic and religious leadership. I also look at the issue of sectarianism. In Syria, the Syrians do not like the word sectarian. It is because many Syrians will say this is not a sectarian country. And in many ways that's right. It's a multiple, diverse country of multiple communities. It's a communal society like much of the Levant. And so I explore within my thesis the concept that actually sectarianism, or the term, is, if you like, almost a Western imposed concept that in many ways misunderstands the plural communal dynamic of the diverse communal contexts within the Middle East. And understanding it as sectarianism brings about division. So going on from the cultural issues which affect the religious communities, I then go on to explore the history and the reality of Christian-Muslim relations within Syria, both, as I say, from a historical context, but also the reality as it has been lived out in the last 10 to 15 years, and particularly during the conflict. And so I use some case studies, and I look at the reality in Aleppo. I spent a lot of time in Aleppo during the conflict, in Ma'alula, and in Sadat, another Christian village, in different contexts to explore how the different elements of religious aspects have been manipulated, if you like, by the conflict, and how that's impacted upon the communities. But the important thing that comes out in these studies is the importance of the interreligious dynamic and the way that people want to hold on to that. So from the case studies, I move on to a really in-depth study of the Eastern Christian contribution to the dialogue between Christianity and Islam. And this is really important because Eastern Christianity has, of course, lived with Islam since the emergence of Islam in the 8th century. And the role of Eastern theologians, and I actually look at the role of current Syrian leaders, theologians, and Christian leaders, and their contribution to the whole Christian-Muslim dynamic, which is really important to understanding the situation as we have it today. In conclusion, it has to be acknowledged that the violence of the conflict that has been experienced has of course impacted on the diversity of the religious landscape, and many people are impacted in different ways and in different places. The level of impact differs according to the context. But the survival of the plurality of that religious context is still there. That's a major conclusion of this work, and it's actually a message of hope out of the conflict. The diversity and the plurality has survived and is surviving, and there's a huge will within Syrian society for that to continue to be respected. Also, another conclusion is that a very important conclusion is that the ecclesial, the theological and the spiritual traditions of Eastern Christianity, which in a way has been neglected by the rest of the global church for so long, has a vital contribution to make in terms of its experience in engaging with Islam and living within that partial Islamic context. And those traditions can inform and strengthen dialogue, not just in Syria and in the region, but actually in the wider context and in the challenges that we face in the plurality and the multi-religious world in which we're living. And also in aiding the conversation that is taking place within Islam itself, as it grapples, and as we all grapple with the increase in radicalism, not just in Islam, but in other faiths as well. And in all of this, there is the importance of the role of religious leadership. We may have, in the West, sort of lost sight a little bit of the importance of religion, but particularly in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, religion is absolutely crucial to society, and the religious leaders play a very important role in terms of the communities and engaging both with political leaders and with their wider communities, and in being figureheads, and so that their role in the paths of peacemaking and dialogue is very, very important. Finally, I see my work as a stepping stone to further study, because it raises more questions, and I think that there's a lot more that needs to be researched further. Some things that come to mind particularly are the Christian contribution to Arab and Muslim civilization over the centuries. That's often neglected, that area. Another is the spirituality of the desert, the Christian spirituality of the desert and patristic theology. That theology out of which emerged and from which emerged a dialogue with Islam. So the monasteries in the Middle East, many of them actually continue to play a part in dialogue as places of dialogue between Christians and Muslims, and are places that are visited by Muslims and Christians together. So that's a very important exploration. Further study on the recognition of Arab plurality and Eastern Christian engagement with Islam through the centuries. And finally, for now, but by no means least, is the role of religion in reconciliation. Because in Syria, unknown to the rest of the world, both Christian and Muslim leaders and lay volunteers are involved on a daily basis in serving their local communities, in trying to bring people together, and in trying to assist people in the tremendous traumas that they've experienced, no matter what communities they belong to.